is everyone's done it. Hello, Jordan.
Hey, how you doing?
What happened
Love the
to the
recording
jungle?
story.
Where's the jungle gone?
I got kicked out of it. Got kicked out of it.
No. Oh
Yeah,
man. What
it's a
happened? Where's
shame.
all the fun and games?
Since you left, it's never been the same.
Yeah. Oh, sweetheart. Yeah, there's a picture of me in the jungle now. I don't know why. Yeah, we were gonna go to our stand up, but Jordan and I were working on uh well, I guess a bunch of things during my day there, but we never figured out how to fix entity caching on the GraphQL side. That was a pretty deep hole. Um, so that's why we weren't at stand up, and I have nothing to show for it.
Anything interesting to share with the broader group on some of the progress, or is it secret squirrel stuff?
It's not secret. I mean, the main things that we accomplished during our hackathon, our 1 day hackathon together, I'd say the headline is that Jordan found a way to bust the cache manually by accessing the client and running the actual operation methods that are on the Apollo cache object. And so the question, so I was able to do it systematically. He got a way to do it manually, and the question is whether we can abstract that out. I guess the other headline is we have a prototype of the project that they're working on, Eleganza, moved over to a scaffolded project. And I don't know, Jordan, if you want to update us, I won't be hurt if you couldn't make that continue and you went back to the fork, but I'd love to hear how it went.
I haven't actually worked on the scaffolding anymore.
Okay.
Because I felt I tested it a little bit and it all seemed to work, but just like 2 weeks before launch, it felt a bit too tricky to
Yeah.
move the whole code base. So, so maybe after the launch, we're gonna swap over to the scaffolding. So yeah, it was too tricky
Okay.
for me.
Well, that's totally reasonable. I think we wanted to see how easy it would be to port it, but there's nothing like urgent that demands that you switch because it's more of a question of better maintainability over time than like fixing a
Yeah.
bug that you need before launch. Yeah. I guess the other news is that in the Netherlands, they'll lend basically a stranger their bike. That
It was
happened.
fun. It was fun.
Yeah.
I
It
saw
was
you were a
great.
little rusty.
I say, hey, okay, a little bit of dirty laundry. All right.
Yep.
All right, great. So I see that we have James Sanford on the line.
I
That's
am
great because
here.
that is one of our big topics for the day. So thanks, James and Jordan, for getting us started on kind of an informal update on your progress over the last week. But really, today we want to spend some time on Peregrine updates and specifically talking about talents. Like every time you say talents, you got to do like this.
Oh yeah.
Talents.
Is this gonna get sound effect?
So at this point, I'll turn it over to you, Jimmy, if you want to give everybody an update and kind of demo there.
Yeah, sure. So, share my screen real quick. Okay. So at the last couple updates, we've been talking about what we're doing with Peregrine, changes we made to Redux system underlying everything. Everything was in service of this goal of taking logic out of any components and putting them in Peregrine, as we were talking about. Basically, the idea there being, if we ever want to add extension points to Venia components, we don't want extension points and logic to be in the same file because then overwriting is dangerous. So we want to take as much logic out of Venia and then have kind of a one-to-one relationship with Venia component and Peregrine component hook, so that you could easily create different variant components without having to re-implement all of the logic. This is, for us, like a pretty important way to preserve flexibility as we start to lock things down with extension in mind. So what we didn't have for that was a name. So if you were paying attention to the community Slack, you'll see that our tentative name for that was mixins, because if you're writing React today, you don't write mixins, you don't use mixins, and so kind of just went with that. But that meant the wrong thing to a lot of people and was probably pretty unintuitive. And of course, there's also an ancient concept in React of mixins with classes. So instead, we went with this name talons, suggested by James Kalkman, because talons are basically hooks, right? And more importantly, this name can't collide with anything that I know of. So that's what this means. Talon specifically refers to a component hook, not a hook that's designed to be reusable like useQuery or to be a utility like useDropdown or something. This is specifically for components that already exist in Venia and had some logic in it, whether it was running a query, having a side effect, something like that. That's what we're calling a Talon. So we've been going component by component in Venia. When I say we, I'm talking about Stephen Rue and I. So putting up PRs for each of the components in Venia, one folder at a time. So we're going to walk through a couple of PRs, one of his, one of mine. I guess that's also one of mine, so we'll go back. Yeah, okay. So we'll look real quick here at the auth bar and user chip. So this is what the Talon looks like. So here in Paragon, just under libtalon's auth bar, and we'll work out the top level exports later, all the React ports. It doesn't pull in React itself, and that's because we're not doing any create elements in these hooks. They're just logic. So we use callback. We get context the same as a Venia component would. And then it's just a function, so it's going to accept an object every time that's got whatever it needs to do its work. So each of these prop shapes will be custom to the hook, just like props are custom to a component. So in this case, we just need disabled, show my account, and show sign in, which are going to be functions. And then we get some information from context. And all we're really doing in this case is creating a couple of callbacks, a couple of handlers. And then from the disabled logic, we're creating a more explanatory name of what it does. So deriving some state. And this return object shape is basically exactly what the component needs. So if we come down to the auth bar component, we import the Talon and import fewer things that it's doing now. And then we call it to get the pieces that we need in order to render. So if there's logic around what specifically to render, that'll still exist in the component because the component is in charge of what gets returned, what elements get created from a component. But the hook will handle any logic, which may be pretty simple or maybe pretty complicated, as we'll see in other things like checkout. And then if we look at another one from here that use user chip, here we're just looking for a callback, which we're going to use to create an event handler, and kind of a complex data object that we get back from either GraphQL or that we're storing in state. And we'll do some of the work that you might ordinarily have to do in the component, right? So combining strings, creating alternate messages, and we'll look at an alternate way during this in a second. Then if we hop over to category trees, you can see that logic for leaf components, so like here literally category leaf and category branch, tends to be pretty thin, so the talons are pretty simple. For something that's a little higher up, that contains kind of a whole tree of logic, in this case literally category tree, it's going to be a little more complicated. It may have side effects. So here we do the fetching. So we'll do running of queries, returning of the data and the state from those queries, updating of Redux as after the query has run, and then some transformation of the data that we got back. So here we're basically doing the first operation that we do on the data in order to shape it into child category objects that can easily be turned into the category nodes themselves on the front end. So here we're returning just a map of child categories, right? So we do all this work in the hook, and then the tree itself, the tree component itself, only needs one thing, and that's the data properly shaped. We'll come down to category tree component. We just call it with the category that we have, what category we're currently on, the function that needs to update, etc. And another thing we're doing here is we pass the GraphQL query into the hook so that you can customize the query. That means that we're probably going to need to come up with a way to indicate from the hook, through documentation or comments, what kind of query it needs. Right now, it's not going to be an issue because we're always going to give it the right query, but that's something that we'll document in a way similar to prop types. So at any rate, there's no net change to the site as a result of this, right? Things work the same, but underneath you have the ability to create totally different variants of components without re-implementing the logic, which is really important, I think, going forward. So keep an eye out for all of these PRs that are rolling into the repo. We're maybe a third of the way done, halfway done, I would say, with those components. We're not going to go overboard, so we're not going to be making literally a hook for every single component because in some cases they don't have logic and they're just UI only. But we will hit all of the big areas, and in some cases it'll lead us to refactor things to be a little simpler for this process. So keep an eye out, and if you want to get involved, try creating a Talon, go ahead and open up a PR.
Great. Thanks, Jimmy.
Man.
Questions, comments, feedback from the audience?
I'd like to ask, I guess, if you think there's like a rule of thumb for how specific a Talon should be. And we talked about this a little bit offline, and I think pretty much any answer is okay here because it's probably just a matter of judgment and almost like personal taste. But like you said, it's not going to be for every single component. So how should we go forward with making new Talons or deciding what's in scope and what's not?
It's definitely a rule of thumb thing, and so it's something where documentation is going to help. Generally speaking, if you are making an event handler, at the least it's where you would start considering making one, because that's just the most common operation. You're like, is this really worth it?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the Talons tend to be pretty small if you don't have much logic to move over. The more tricky question of should I do this or not is whether the logic is specific to the rendered UI or whether it's operating on props and data. So like we saw there, if we have a condition where we're deciding what to render, like between two different trees of elements.
Okay.
we could use a Talon if there's work that goes into deciding what the conditional itself is. For example, show subtree or not is true or false, right? If calculating that involves some logic, we may do that in a Talon. But
Sure,
if it's just hinging off of a prop we already got, then yeah.
Sure, I mean, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And it seems like probably it's going to be demand driven because sometimes
Yes.
there are, data structures that clearly lend themselves to a UI concept that everyone likes and shares, and the demand for that will become clear. So fair enough. That's a good answer.
Yeah, I would not, like I said, I would not go overboard with them. So we're doing
Sure.
them where the need is obvious, and then what will happen when we're done here is we'll look back on it and we'll see opportunities to combine things that are basically doing the same logic, like where we could have abstracted and we just never saw it, or things to simplify, or we'll just say, you know what, we just added code for no reason, right? We're going to get rid of this Talon because it's really not doing that much, right? So
Yeah.
we'll have a much better perspective on that when we have these.
Gotcha. And I mean, removing a Talon, if it's out, probably will consist of the usual process of deprecating it by having it log a big old warning in development, but not just like disappearing it overnight.
Right.
Yeah.
Steven, did you have something?
No, he's right. I was going to say, maybe not, because we haven't released it yet, but depends at what point, right? Like if we do release a Talons and people start customizing their components using, their own user chip rather than our user chip, then yeah, good call.
Yeah, all of this is happening on develop at the moment, and so before we seal this up into a release, we'll have like a good holistic look at what all of the Talons are, and eliminate the ones that are not useful, combine them where we can, and then document it for the release.
Great. Any other questions? All right, so again, for the Talons work, obviously, if you have any questions or any follow-up that you don't want to ask on the call today, feel free to reach out to Jimmy, feel free to reach out to Steven in the community Slack. I just like throwing your name on things. This is what I do. We don't have any other formal demos, I think, unless anybody on the call wants to demo something listed for today. But what I thought would be super helpful is there's a lot of discovery work that's happening. If you've been in our backlog or seen some of the newer milestones, there's a lot of work streams that are kind of all concurrent and going on other than the Peregrine and Talons work. So I just thought I'd give the team a chance to do a little roundtable and say, hey, here's the area where I'm doing some discovery. Here's the area for performance that we're really looking to try to move forward. And if you're interested and you're on this call or you're a member of the community in this particular work stream, this is how you can get involved. So maybe we'll start there with Ravon and then kind of go around and then end the call from there.
Yeah, I'm working on the service workers and Webpack. I'm trying to see how we can utilize Webpack to ease up the build process and also how to speed up the caching on the client side. Also how to utilize the caching using service workers, and because it's just like a separate thread that's available for us. So use it for anything that can be like caching, prefetching, reloading, everything. That's what I'm working on.
Awesome.
I guess I'll start working on Talon's documentation along with MLU lab stuff.
Yeah, that's a good plug. Yeah, so we have MLU coming up. We're obviously refreshing the lab content. If you want to be at MLU, that's a good plug for attending the lab sessions, for some hands-on time with getting started with PWA Studio, customizing PWA Studio, given all the newer development that's happened in the last few months. All right.
I just finished up investigations into GraphQL usage, Apollo specifically. So created a bunch of tickets out of that, and also the React rendering profile. So there's a bunch of tickets that came out of that. So yeah, now that those investigations are done, I've just been kind of prioritize them in terms of low effort, high benefit stuff, and I'll start it on those. You'll start to see some pretty small PRs right now, but that are pretty impactful. and then kind of as we go on, that'll switch. But yeah, the ones that are coming out now should be pretty easy to look at and digest, and should have a big benefit. So that's cool.
I'm queuing all of these tickets.
Yeah.
And also I'm working on some CI/CD stuff for AWS migration. Yep, that's it.
That is a machine.
That is.
I don't have anything besides what Jimmy's been showing. That's all we've been doing.
And then end with Mr. Zetlin on the line if you want to take it away with an update or what you're looking at.
Yo, there are so many good issues out there for people to take. Just as a quick review, I went to Munich for Contribution Day at Meet Magento Munich armed with a little prototype of the scaffolding mechanism, NPM init Magento PWA, that it was updated for the first time since Imagine, actually. And it now works, although until we publish it for real, you still have to use the secret Meet Magento Munich dist tag, which goes a little something like this: npm init at magento /pwa at cdmuc19. So this is just something you can test out if you really want to have a preview. We are still QAing it and just so close to getting it merged, and then at that point it'll be released, maybe not with 4.0, but perhaps as a fast follow with 4.1. And the point of this, again, is so that you can begin a project and have it connected to the PWA Studio dependencies through real semantic versioning in your package JSON, instead of having to fork our project and then try to pull in the updates and changes through merging in the Git workflow willy-nilly, the way that only really advanced users like Jordan, etc., or the folks at JH can really do. So starting a project this way helps, and as we discussed and as we discovered at Experius on Monday, it's not so hard to adapt an existing project from a fork into this system as well. So we are creating a project called Community Sync, and I've demoed this before, so we'll go through it real fast. But this is going to go ahead and download Venia concept at a particular version from NPM. And as a secret feature buried inside this that you might want to check out some documentation to see is that you can create your own templates, because there is an actual API inside Build Pack to generate these templates and to describe how they should be copied into a new project. So anyway, that I'm going to go ahead and take the focus away from, because the other cool thing about Meet Magento, about CDMUC, was that we actually got some pull requests and merged them. And like always, the core team has done a great deal of cool work, but there's also been a lot, let's see, those are the open pull requests. There have also been a lot of cool little contributions, and this is stuff that even things of this size are really valuable to us. For instance, Lucas at MMUC, though he had never done any React work or work on a project of this nature before, he went in and corrected a little issue where we logged a reminder to do a custom origin because of a little bug with how we detected it. Same with the sticky attribute from pagination, which turned out to be a small fix, but it's still really valuable to have to go in and to do the research and the verification to do that, which Lucas did very, very quickly. So we had some engagement and some uptake, though he's the one who opened the most successful pull requests. There were about 5 people there who really wanted to get in on it, and scaffolding helped them to get started much faster, though they also were successful in just cloning their repository and getting going. The biggest thing that we found that I think we need to address is the issue of connecting the PWA Studio and Venia instance that you have to a local instance of Magento. And we worked really hard to make sure that you don't have to do that, so we can welcome people into the fold who don't necessarily know how or have an easy way of setting up a local instance of Magento that's all their own. So we let you connect it to cloud instances. However, that's sort of because we didn't cover that issue very much over the course of the last few iterations of development, since we can avoid it here on the core team, there were some usability issues with it that arose that we started to see when people in Munich who do have the ability to create a Magento instance and who are actually the most familiar with starting their work that way, they noticed that there are actually some problems in trying to do it. The main problems being that there is, let's see, I remember somebody opened an issue about it. This is 8 days ago. Okay, I can't find it, but somebody opened an issue about it, describing how if you don't have your security certificate that the local Magento instance uses somehow trusted in Node, then you can get all sorts of complaints from the internal Node libraries. And dealing with SSL self-signed certificates in Node is a known issue, and one that now that we've actually had the uptake and the traction on the project at the Contribution Day Munich, one that has been that we've been alerted to. And I say that, but I need to find the issue where that happened. So this is a great example of the benefit to going to contribution days for us as a team, that even though we have a great advantage in speed in doing things our own way, bringing in people from the Magento world is going to help us notice things that we wouldn't otherwise notice. So between that and a fantastic experience that I had going and sitting down with Jordan at Experius, they were kind enough to host me and to blow some productivity on spending a day showing me their stuff and talking to me about extensibility concepts. We have a whole bunch of stuff in process and in the pipeline as issues, which is going to help with that tremendously. And Andy Terranova talked about that. If you look through the recently opened issues that are tagged with performance, you'll see that Andy opened up a whole lot of issues that illustrate the individual tasks that we need to do, not just to get things fast, but to also just kind of do things right. And so our performance story is in a way also a best practices story, just for knowing that we are doing the underlying data layer right and in a way that scales, so that people can build features without worrying about slowness. And not only that, but Dev has been opening issues and Stephen issues, and of course, Mr. Kalkoven, as always, issues about documentation. And then Revant, who's very new to the project, has opened a whole bunch of issues about, well, looks like these cover performance as well as testability and everything else. So take a look. If you are on this call from the community and you've been waiting to find something that you can really engage with. Now, no, we haven't groomed these issues and assigned them help wanted tags yet, and we're going to do that. But if you want to take some initiative, get out ahead and grab stuff that's going to have a big benefit without too much work on your part, now is the time. It's more possible, I think, than ever to find something that you can fit into your work schedule and contribute back to the project. And I have to thank Andy and Revant and Dev and Stephen and everyone else who's opened issues for that. That's all I got.
Awesome. Thanks, James. So that was a lot in a little bit of time. We'll pause quickly for questions, comments. All right. So like Mr. Zetland pointed out, right, there's a lot of work going on. There are a lot of work streams. Please feel free if you have questions or you want to engage or you see something that's interesting. As always, reach out to us on the Slack channel, ping us directly, email us. You know where to find us. And if there's nothing else, I think that is about it for today.
Subscribe.
Don't forget to smash like and subscribe.
Yeah.
That's right. Onwards and upwards.
Hit us up on Instagram at nope, don't do that.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Bye bye.